Chapter 3. Whispers of Darkness. The moon had risen fully by the time Major Keller stumbled from the third gate's entrance. He swayed briefly, adjusting his uniform jacket with clumsy fingers before setting off down the cobblestone street. His gait was unsteady but purposeful. A man who'd had too much to drink but knew exactly where he was going. Cael detached from the shadows, maintaining a careful distance as he followed. The streets were largely empty at this hour, with most citizens observing the unofficial curfew that had become standard practice during the occupation. Only Draven's patrols and those with special dispensation moved freely after midnight. Keller's rank insignia served as his passage, earning perfunctory salutes from the occasional patrol they passed. The Major barely acknowledged them, his focus entirely on reaching his destination, which surprisingly wasn't the officers' quarters in the Western District. Instead, he was heading south toward the warehouse district near the river. Interesting. And convenient. The less populated area would provide privacy for the conversation Cael intended to have. Keller turned down a narrow side street, then through an iron gate into what appeared to be a small private courtyard attached to a nondescript building. Cael paused, surveying the area before approaching. The building bore no markings of official business, no flags, no posted guards, but its windows were reinforced with metal grating, and the lock on the gate was new and substantial. A personal project, perhaps, or something unofficial but sanctioned. Cael circled the block, identifying a service alley that ran behind the building. A delivery entrance stood partially alight, its door propped open slightly, likely by Keller himself, too drunk to properly secure it after entry. Moving silently, Cael approached the door and listened. From within came the sounds of movement, drawers opening, glass clinking against glass. After confirming no other presence was detectable, he eased the door open and slipped inside. The room beyond was a laboratory of sorts. Workbenches lined the walls covered with equipment both alchemical and arcane. Glass vessels connected by copper tubing bubbled with liquids in unnatural colours. Magical instruments hummed with contained energy. The air smelled of ozone, chemicals, and something else. Something organic and unpleasant. Keller stood with his back to the door, rummaging through a cabinet of glass vials. He extracted one containing a luminescent purple liquid, holding it up to the light with satisfaction. "Found what you were looking for?" Cael asked quietly. The Major whirled, dropping the vial in shock. It shattered on the stone floor, the liquid hissing as it made contact with the air. "Who?" Keller began, reaching for his sidearm. Cael was faster. The blackjack was in his hand and connecting with precise force against Keller's wrist before the weapon could clear its holster. The Major yelped in pain, his hand spasming uselessly as the gun clattered to the floor. "Let's talk about Elise," Cael said, his voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of menace. Recognition dawned in Keller's eyes, followed quickly by fear. "You're not... you were asking about..." "Yes." Cael kicked the fallen gun across the room, well out of reach. "Now, we can do this quietly and with dignity, or we can make it messy. Your choice, Major." Keller backed away until he hit the workbench, his eyes darting frantically around the room for escape or weapon. Finding neither, his expression hardened into desperate defiance. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he spat. "This is official business. Highest priority." "Killing Madame Soleil's girls is official business now." Cael stepped closer, the blackjack held casually but visibly at his side. "Interesting policy change." "She heard things she shouldn't have," Keller said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper despite their apparent solitude. "Saw things. Was going to talk. Couldn't allow that." "What did she see, Major?" Cael asked, his tone conversational but his eyes hard as steel. "Something to do with this place? With the heart of murk dusk?" Keller's face drained of colour. "How do you know about..." He stopped himself, swallowing hard. "Your resistance. Have to be. No one else would know that name." "I'm just a concerned citizen," Cael replied. "Now, Elise, what happened to her?" The Major's eyes flicked to a closed door at the rear of the laboratory. The gesture was brief, involuntary, but Cael caught it immediately. "She's here?" he asked, genuine surprise colouring his voice. "Not anymore," Keller said, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Not really. But yes, what's left of her?" His posture shifted subtly, a familiar calculation entering his expression, the look of a man deciding how much truth might save him. "I was following orders," he continued, speaking faster now. "She was in my quarters, providing services. Overheard a communication about the Heart's arrival. Started asking questions. Protocol is clear. Security breach means containment." "So you killed her," Cael said flatly. Keller shook his head vehemently. "No, I brought her here. Reported the breach. They said she could serve a purpose. Contribute to the work." A cold weight settled in Cael's stomach. "What work, exactly?" The Major's eyes darted to the purple liquid now burning a small crater in the stone floor. "Extraction protocols. The Realm Material Initiative." His words tumbled out faster as if unburdening himself. "The heart of Murkdusk is an analyzer. Identifies unique properties in exotic materials. We've been searching for something specific, something with enhancement properties beyond conventional magic." Cael's grip on the blackjack tightened imperceptibly. "And Elise became part of your search somehow." "She was going to die anyway," Keller said, a note of desperate justification in his voice. "This way, her death contributed to the cause. Ravina believes certain biological components might react differently to these materials, show different properties under stress." The name registered immediately. Ravina. A name whispered in fear even among Draven's officers. Someone powerful enough to direct operations across multiple realms while remaining unseen. "Show me," Cael commanded. For a moment it seemed Keller might refuse. Then his shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. "You'll kill me anyway. Might as well see what you're disrupting." He moved toward the rear door, Cael following at a careful distance. The Major's keyring jingled as he unlocked the heavy door, revealing a short corridor beyond. The smell grew stronger, chemical, but underlaid with the unmistakable scent of decay. The corridor led to another room, this one colder and clinically austere. A metal table dominated the space, bearing what had once been a human form. The body, if it could still be called that, was partially dissected, with strange crystalline growths visible along the exposed muscles and organs. Specimen jars lined shelves along the wall, containing fragments of tissue suspended in clear fluid. Cael had seen death in many forms during his military career, had witnessed battlefield atrocities and the aftermath of siege warfare. But this was something else entirely. This was methodical perversion of humanity itself. "That's Elise?" he asked, his voice betraying no emotion despite the horror before him. Keller nodded, gesturing to the table where the female form lay partially covered by a sheet. Her face was still recognizable. Young, perhaps once pretty, but her features were contorted in an expression of agony that death had not erased. "The crystalline formations appeared after injection with the experimental compound," Keller said, his clinical tone suggesting he distanced himself from the humanity of his subject. "We're trying to understand how different materials might affect living tissue. The heart of Murkdusk will help us identify precisely what elements cause these particular reactions." "Why?" Cael asked simply. "What's the purpose of all this?" "Ravina believes there are materials in other realms, sealed realms, with properties unlike anything in known magical science," Keller explained, warming to his subject despite the circumstances. "Materials that could revolutionize warfare, enhance capabilities beyond current limitations. She's particularly interested in substances that interact with supernatural potential." "And the heart helps you find these materials?" "It helps us analyze trace elements we've already managed to recover," Keller corrected. "Identify their properties, their potential applications. This is just preliminary research, proof of concept. If these initial studies show promise, Ravina plans a much larger initiative. Cael's tactical mind immediately grasped the implications. If Ravina discovered materials with truly unprecedented properties that could enhance supernatural abilities, the balance of power throughout the connected realms could shift dramatically. "Why Concordia?" he asked. "Why bring the heart here?" "The portals," Keller said, as if it were obvious. "Concordia is the nexus point, connections to more realms than anywhere else. That's why Lord Draven secured it in the first place, strategic access. The heart can identify potential sources of these materials through the portal network, pinpoint which realms might contain larger deposits. And Draven provides the facilities, the test subjects," Cael noted grimly. "He provides everything Ravina requires," Keller said with a shrug. "Samples, subjects, security. The research advances his interests, too. The materials we identify could make his forces unstoppable." "But Ravina controls the research," Cael pressed, gathering as much intelligence as possible. "She controls everything," Keller replied, a hint of awe in his voice. "Draven might think he's building his empire, but it's all in service to her vision. She lets him play warlord while she creates, transforms." He gestured toward Elise's remains. "This is just the beginning. She's planning something much larger. Something that will change everything." "Change how?" Keller's expression shifted, fanaticism replacing fear. "Ravina believes in a natural order, a system where chaos forces evolution, where the strong emerge through necessary destruction." His voice lowered to a reverent whisper. "These materials we're searching for, they don't just enhance, they transform, rewrite what's possible. Imagine entire armies with abilities beyond natural limitation. Imagine the chaos they could create, the change they could force." Cael had heard enough. His hand moved in a blur, the blackjack connecting with precise force against Keller's temple. The Major crumpled to the floor, unconscious but alive. Alive, but not for long. This situation required more than just justice for Elise. It demanded containment. The information about Ravina's research project was too dangerous to risk exposure. If Keller regained consciousness and reported this breach, Cael's entire network would be at risk. The hunting knife slid from its sheath with practiced ease, one swift, precise cut across the Major's throat, and the risk was eliminated. Cael cleaned the blade methodically on Keller's uniform before resheathing it. Standing, he surveyed the laboratory with cold calculation. The evidence here was damning, proof of atrocities that even some of Draven's forces might balk at if made public. But destroying it would alert Ravina's people that someone knew about the project. Better to leave it intact. Let them find Keller's body and assume he'd been killed for his involvement with Elise. A simple case of vengeance from Madame Soleil's organization. They would tighten security around the main operation, but wouldn't necessarily realize that information about the heart's purpose had been compromised. Cael moved quickly through the laboratory, memorizing key details, equipment configurations, formula notations, the names listed on research documents, intelligence that would prove invaluable to understanding the larger plan taking shape. Before leaving, he returned to Elise's remains. Despite the horrific experiments, something of the young woman remained in her features. Cael stood silent for a moment, a wordless acknowledgement of her suffering. Then he covered her face with the sheet, a small dignity in death that she had been denied in her final days of life. The night air felt cleansing after the laboratory's tainted atmosphere. Cael moved through the shadows toward the river, where he could wash away any evidence of his activities before returning to safer ground. His mind was already cataloguing the night's discoveries, organizing them into the greater pattern of Draven's occupation. The heart of murk dusk. Ravina's search for exotic materials from sealed realms. Research into substances that could somehow enhance supernatural abilities. Concordia's portal network being used to locate these materials. This was no mere occupation of a strategically valuable city. This was preparation for something far more ambitious, research that could eventually give Ravina power beyond conventional magic, power that might someday let her create chaos on an unprecedented scale. As Cael knelt beside the river, washing Keller's blood from his hands, he made a decision. This information couldn't remain solely in his possession. The network he'd built over the past year was extensive, but this threat required more than just observation and intelligence gathering. It required documentation. Careful, thorough documentation that might someday prove vital if Ravina's research bore fruit years from now. Tomorrow he would begin recording everything he'd learned, not just in his coded journals, but in a secure archive that could survive even if he did not. Future resistance might need to understand how this power evolved, what foundations were laid during these early days of occupation. The night was growing old as Cael made his way back toward the artisans' quarter. By morning, Major Keller's body would be discovered. By noon, Madame Soleil would receive word that justice for Elise had been delivered. By nightfall, Cael would begin creating the historical record of what might someday become Ravina's most dangerous weapon. After a year of patience, of watching and waiting, the game was changing. And Commander Cael Varnor, long thought retired or irrelevant, was ensuring that when the true battle eventually came, perhaps years from now, those fighting against what Ravina had created would understand what they were facing and how it began. Some wars were fought with weapons and armies, others with knowledge preserved against the day it would be needed most. Chapter 4. Threads of Power. Dawn arrived with the methodical precision of a city under occupation. Street patrols changed shifts, merchants set up under watchful eyes, citizens moved with the careful deference of people who knew they were constantly observed. Concordia breathed, but its rhythm was dictated by its captors. Cael had been awake for hours, seated at his small desk near the window of his modest quarters. The early light caught the dust motes hanging in the air as he carefully transcribed his discoveries from the previous night. His handwriting was precise, military, the script of a man who understood that unclear information could cost lives. This journal, unlike his daily observation logs, was written in a cipher of his own creation, developed during the border wars for communicating troop movements across enemy territory. The code had never been broken then. He doubted anyone in Draven's forces could decipher it now. He documented everything: the heart of Murkdusk's purpose as an analyzer for exotic materials, Ravina's search for substances that could enhance supernatural abilities, the use of Concordia's portal network to locate these materials across realms. Most importantly, he noted the relationship between Draven and Ravina, the warlord unknowingly serving a greater power with more ambitious plans. As he completed the entry, a soft knock came at his door, 3 gentle taps followed by 2 shorter ones. The pattern identified the visitor as Leora, an elderly herbalist whose shop provided both medicine and gossip to half the district. "Enter," Cael called, closing the journal and sliding it beneath a loose floorboard. Leora stepped inside, her threadbare shawl wrapped tightly around hunched shoulders. Despite her age and apparent frailty, her eyes remained sharp as she scanned the room before speaking. "There's talk in the market," she said without preamble, voice barely above a whisper. "Major Keller was found dead this morning, throat cut in some kind of laboratory in the warehouse district." Cael's expression revealed nothing. "Unfortunate. Any suspects?" "Officials are suggesting revenge. Apparently he frequented some of the pleasure houses. Made enemies." She settled onto a worn stool near the door. "But there's more. They're moving something big today, from the governor's residence to the central portal hub." This was unexpected. The heart of Murkdusk had only arrived last night. Cael had assumed it would be installed at the residence for security. "The heart," he murmured. Leora nodded. "That's the whisper." Guards are being pulled from regular posts to form a secure corridor between locations. Full tactical gear, triple the usual numbers. When? Midday. They're clearing the main avenue, she replied. My nephew works in the central portal facility. Says they've been preparing a special chamber for days. Reinforced walls, specialized containment runes. Cael considered this information carefully. Moving the heart to the central portal hub made strategic sense if its purpose was to analyze materials from different realms. The hub contained Concordia's largest and most stable portals, connections to dozens of realms that had been carefully maintained for centuries. Your nephew, he said slowly. How close will he be to this chamber? He's on the maintenance crew, has access to most of the facility, but they've restricted the east wing where this chamber is located. Special clearance only. Cael nodded thoughtfully. Keep him away today. Tell him to claim illness. Leora's eyes narrowed slightly. You're planning something. Just gathering information, Cael replied smoothly, but caution serves us all right now. She studied him for a moment before nodding. I'll tell him. Anything else you need? Information about the convoy's route would be useful. I'll see what I can learn. She rose stiffly, adjusting her shawl. Be careful, Commander. Keller's death has them looking for threats. The patrols are more aggressive than usual. After Leora departed, Cael moved to the window, gazing out at the awakening city. The portal hub was visible from here, a massive circular structure at Concordia's center, its ancient stone walls inlaid with silver runes that glowed faintly even in daylight. Once a symbol of connection and prosperity, now it served as another instrument of Draven's control. Moving the heart there indicated a significant escalation in their research. Keller had said they were still in preliminary phases, but perhaps that had accelerated. Or perhaps Ravina had other plans for the artifact, plans that required direct access to multiple realms simultaneously. Either way, the transfer presented both risk and opportunity. Increased security meant greater danger, but movement always created vulnerabilities that static defenses did not have. Cael dressed methodically, selecting clothing that would allow him to blend with the midday crowds while concealing his weapons. The hunting knife remained at his hip, but he added a second blade in an ankle sheath and the blackjack in its customary place in his boot. Nothing that would trigger suspicion at a distance, but enough to defend himself if necessary. The streets grew busier as morning progressed, though noticeably less so along the main avenue. Word of the coming convoy had spread, citizens instinctively avoiding areas of increased military presence. Cael moved through side streets, working his way gradually toward the governor's residence, where the convoy would originate. By mid-morning, he had established himself in a small tea house with a clear view of the residence's eastern gate. The position wasn't ideal, too far for detailed observation, but closer approaches were already being cleared by patrols. The tea house owner, a thin man with nervous hands, kept glancing toward the growing military presence outside. Bad business today, he muttered as he refilled Cael's cup. Whatever they're moving, it's important enough to shut down half the district. Cael made a non-committal sound, maintaining his focus on the gate. The convoy vehicles were already visible in the courtyard beyond, 3 heavily armoured transports surrounded by soldiers in full tactical gear. Not just regular occupation forces, but elite units reserved for high-priority operations. Third cup's free if you're staying through the show, the owner added, a hint of dark humour in his voice. Might as well make the best of it. Generous, Cael replied absently. His attention had fixed on a figure emerging from the residence, a woman in a deep crimson coat, her bearing imperious as she directed the loading procedure. Even at this distance, her authority was evident in how the soldiers responded to her presence. Not Ravina herself. The mysterious commander rarely left her base in murkdusk, but someone high in her organization. Perhaps one of her direct lieutenants, sent to oversee the heart's transfer personally. The tea house owner followed his gaze. That's Lady Valerian, he said, voice dropping further. Ravina's right hand. only comes to Concordia for special projects. Cael filed the name away. If Valerian was personally overseeing the transfer, the heart was even more significant than he'd initially assessed. "You seem well informed," he noted carefully. The owner's smile was thin and bitter. "My establishment is popular with administrative staff. They talk more freely after a few drinks." He hesitated, then added, "especially when encouraged by a sympathetic ear." Cael's eyes shifted from the convoy to study the man more carefully. Another hidden ally? Or a potential trap? The occupation had made everyone suspicious, trust a luxury few could afford. "Sympathetic ears are rare these days," he replied neutrally. "Rarer still are those who act on what they hear." The owner wiped down the counter with methodical movements. "Like whoever dealt with Major Keller last night." "A test, then." Cael maintained his carefully neutral expression. "Justice finds its way, even in dark times." The owner nodded slightly, seemingly satisfied with the response. "They call her the Crimson Witch, you know. Valerian. Say she was a battle mage before joining Ravena's inner circle, specializes in blood magic. Useful information, if true. Blood mages were formidable opponents, able to enhance their own physical capabilities or weaken others from a distance. Not someone to engage directly if it could be avoided." Outside, the convoy began to move. The 3 armoured vehicles pulled into tight formation, surrounded by soldiers on foot. Lady Valerian entered the lead vehicle, her crimson coat flaring behind her like a banner of authority. "Show's starting," the owner murmured, retreating to give Cael a clearer view. The convoy moved with practiced precision, each soldier maintaining exact position as they proceeded down the avenue. Citizens who hadn't received word of the closure scattered hastily from their path, pressing themselves against buildings or ducking into side streets to avoid attention. Cael waited until the convoy had passed the tea house before leaving a few coins on the counter and nodding his thanks to the owner. Once outside, he moved parallel to the main avenue, using side streets to track the convoy's progress while remaining out of sight. The route toward the portal hub took them through Concordia's central district, once the heart of the city's governance and culture, now transformed into military and administrative headquarters for the occupation. Security here was naturally higher, but so were the crowds of workers and messengers moving between buildings. Cael used these crowds for cover, just another aging citizen on necessary business, unremarkable and beneath notice. He kept the convoy in view through occasional glimpses down connecting streets, noting its steady progress and the reactions of patrols as it approached. As they neared the portal hub, he diverted to a different approach, an elevated walkway that connected 2 administrative buildings, offering a vantage point over the hub's main entrance. Not close enough for detailed observation, but sufficient to see the transfer process. The walkway was largely empty, most staff having been cleared from sensitive areas during the transfer. Cael positioned himself near a support column, partially concealed while maintaining a clear line of sight to the hub entrance below. The convoy arrived with clockwork precision, the vehicles forming a protective semicircle around the main doors. Lady Valerian emerged first, scanning the area with calculating eyes before signalling the soldiers to begin the transfer. From the central transport, a cylindrical container approximately 2 meters tall was carefully unloaded. Its metallic surface was etched with intricate runes that pulsed with inner light, and it required 6 soldiers to maneuver it despite an obvious levitation enchantment assisting with its weight. The heart of murk dusk. Not what Cael had expected. He'd imagined something more organic given the name, perhaps literally heart-shaped. Instead, this was clearly a sophisticated piece of arcane technology, its design suggesting ancient origin but perfect preservation. As they moved the cylinder toward the entrance, a strange distortion rippled through the air around it, the same effect Cael had observed during its arrival at the East Gate. Reality itself seemed to bend slightly in its presence, light refracting at impossible angles. More interesting was the reaction of the portal hub itself. The silver runes embedded in its ancient walls flared noticeably brighter as the heart approached, as if responding to its presence. Some connection existed between the artifact and the portal network, something fundamental and powerful. Lady Valerian followed the container closely, one hand extended toward it, fingers moving in subtle patterns that might be maintaining stability or monitoring its condition. Her focus was absolute, her expression revealing nothing but intense concentration. The procession disappeared into the hub, leaving the convoy vehicles and a protective detail outside. Cael remained in position, knowing the most valuable observation would come after the transfer: the patterns of guards, the security protocols established, the frequency of personnel movement in and out of the facility. For nearly an hour, he watched as new security measures were implemented around the hub. Additional checkpoints appeared at each entrance. Patrol patterns shifted to increase coverage of approaches. Magical sensors were activated along the perimeter, their enchantments visible as faint blue hazes to those trained to perceive such things. When Lady Valerian finally emerged, she spent several minutes in conversation with the security commander, gesturing occasionally toward different areas of the hub. Her instructions were clearly detailed and specific, the commander nodding and making notes before issuing orders to his subordinates. One detail caught Cael's attention. Valerian specifically indicated the maintenance access points, ordering visible reinforcement. She understood potential vulnerabilities well, closing avenues of approach that most would overlook. Military background indeed, and a thorough one. Finally satisfied, she departed in one of the convoy vehicles, leaving the hub under its enhanced security. The remaining vehicles dispersed to regular patrols, the transfer complete. Cael withdrew from his observation point carefully, taking an indirect route back toward the artisans' quarter. His mind was already cataloguing the new security arrangements, identifying potential weaknesses, despite Valerian's thoroughness. Not for immediate exploitation. He was still gathering intelligence, not planning direct action, but for future reference. The heart's placement in the portal hub confirmed his earlier assessment. Its purpose was directly tied to Concordia's connections to other realms, whether for analysing materials already collected or for identifying new sources across realms. The artifact represented a significant advancement in Ravena's research capabilities. By late afternoon, Cael had returned to his quarters and begun updating his journals. The tea house owner's information about Lady Valerian added valuable context to the command structure. The security arrangements at the hub provided insight into priorities and concerns. The heart itself, with its strange reality-distorting properties, suggested capabilities beyond conventional magic. As dusk approached, a familiar pattern of knocks announced another visitor. Cael secured his journals before responding. "Enter." The door opened to reveal Draven, the young runner who served as one of his most reliable message carriers. The boy slipped inside quickly, his usual energy subdued. "Evening, Grey," he said quietly using Cael's cover name. "Madame Soleil requests your presence tonight. Says it's important." Cael nodded. He'd expected this. Madame Soleil would want confirmation about Keller and details about Elise's fate. "Tell her I'll come after nightfall." Draven hesitated, shifting his weight nervously. "There's something else. My friend Dawn works as a kitchen boy at the portal hub. Says they've brought in special prisoners today, kept in the same section as the new artifact. This was unexpected. Prisoners. How many?" 3, he thinks, all supernatural types. One definitely elven, the others he couldn't tell. Heavily guarded, treated careful-like. Not like regular prisoners. Test subjects, most likely. If the heart was being used to analyse materials that affected supernatural abilities, having subjects with varied supernatural backgrounds would be valuable for research. "Your friend Dawn," Cael said carefully. "How close can he get to this section?" "Not close. delivers food to the outer checkpoint, but the guards take it from there. Taven chewed his lip thoughtfully. But he says the vents connect throughout the building. Sometimes he can hear things from other sections. An old building like the portal hub would indeed have an extensive ventilation system, likely predating modern security considerations. Potentially useful, though not without significant risk. Tell him to be very careful, Cael warned. Listen only, never look, and tell no one but you what he hears. Taven nodded solemnly. I will. Same drop point for messages? Yes. And Taven? Cael held the boy's gaze. If anything seems wrong, if anyone shows unusual interest in him or his work, he stops immediately. Understand? Yes, sir. The formal address slipped out unconsciously, a reminder of how many in his network suspected or knew his military background, despite his careful cover. After Taven left, Cael prepared for his meeting with Madame Soleil. The Velvet Thorn would be busy tonight. News of Keller's death would have spread through unofficial channels, and many of Draven's officers would be seeking comfort and distraction from the reminder of their mortality. A perfect environment for gathering additional intelligence if approached carefully. As night descended on Concordia, Cael moved through shadows that had become familiar allies. The heart of Murk-Dusk had arrived, Ravina's research continued, and the threads of power were pulling tighter. But in that tightening, patterns emerged. Vulnerabilities revealed themselves, and Commander Cael Varnor, patient as the stones of Concordia itself, continued to watch and wait. Not just for justice or vengeance, but for the moment when knowledge would become power, and power would become liberation. Chapter 5. Shifting Tides. 3 weeks had passed since the heart of Murk-Dusk's arrival, and Concordia had settled into a new rhythm of tension. The portal hub's enhanced security had become routine, citizens learning to navigate the expanded checkpoints and patrol routes. But beneath this surface calm, currents of information flowed through Cael's carefully cultivated network. He sat in his usual corner at the broken shield, nursing his perpetual ale while cataloguing the evening's intelligence. The tavern had grown quieter since Keller's death. Draven's officers were more cautious about their conversations, more aware that walls had ears and shadows held watchers. Mira approached with her usual efficiency, wiping down tables as she moved through her section. When she reached Cael's table, her movements were deliberately slow. "Third shipment this week to the hub," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the tavern's ambient noise. "Always at night, always the same route." Cael's fingers tightened imperceptibly around his mug. "Same cargo?" "Can't tell. Sealed containers, but smaller than the heart," she continued wiping, her expression showing nothing more than professional attention to her work. "My cousin works the night shift at the Eastern warehouse. Says they're bringing in materials from places he's never heard of." "Exotic materials," Cael noted quietly. "That's the word." Mira straightened, moving on to the next table. "Strange thing is, they're not storing them long. In one night, out the next to the hub. Processing then. The heart was being used exactly as Keller had described, analysing materials from various realms, likely determining their enhancement properties. The frequency suggested either urgency or success in their research. A commotion near the tavern's entrance drew his attention. 2 of Draven's officers had entered, but these weren't the usual off-duty soldiers seeking drink and distraction. Their bearing was formal, purposeful. They were here on business. Cael recognised one of them, Captain Thorn, who had overseen the Heart's arrival at the East Gate. His presence here, in a civilian establishment, was unusual enough to warrant attention. The officers approached the bar where the owner greeted them with nervous deference. Their conversation was brief, conducted in tones too low to overhear from Cael's position. But the owner's increasingly pale complexion suggested the nature of their inquiry. After a few minutes, the officers departed, leaving behind a tavern full of patrons trying too hard to appear uninterested in what had just occurred. The owner retreated to his office behind the bar, Emerging only after several minutes had passed, Cael remained in his corner, patient as always. Eventually, Mira made her way back to his table. "They were asking about strangers," she said quietly, her cleaning motions automatic. "Anyone new, anyone asking unusual questions, specifically mentioned last month's incident." Keller's death, then. They were still investigating, still searching for whoever had eliminated their research liaison. The fact that Captain Thorne was personally involved suggested the inquiry had escalated beyond local security. "Any particular focus?" Cael asked. "Military types, people with tactical knowledge." Mira's expression remained carefully neutral. "They're expanding their search beyond the obvious suspects." Troubling but not unexpected. Keller's death had been too clean, too precise for them to dismiss as simple revenge. Someone with professional skills had been involved, and they were narrowing their focus accordingly. "I should go," Cael said, leaving coins on the table, enough to cover his drink and express appreciation for the information. "Be safe," Mira replied, the words carrying more weight than a casual farewell. Outside, Concordia's night air carried the scent of approaching rain. Cael moved through familiar shadows, his route taking him away from the main thoroughfares, where patrols had increased since the Heart's installation. The investigation into Keller's death was creating pressure throughout his network. Time to check on his more vulnerable contacts. His first stop was a narrow alley behind a bakery in the merchant district, where a loose stone in the wall concealed one of several dead drop locations. Inside, he found a folded paper marked with the sigil that identified messages from Lady Vess's household staff. The message was brief but significant. "Special meeting tomorrow, dawn. East wing closed to all staff. V.V. attending." V.V., Lady Valerian, Ravina's lieutenant, who had overseen the Heart's transfer. Her return to Concordia suggested new developments in the research project. Combined with the increased material shipments Mira had reported, it painted a picture of accelerating activity. Cael memorized the message before dissolving it in a small vial of alchemical solution he kept for such purposes. The paper vanished completely, leaving no trace of its existence. His next destination was the Artisans' Quarter, where a clockmaker named Henrik maintained both timepieces and information for select clients. The shop was dark, closed for the evening, but Cael knew to approach the rear entrance where a specific pattern of taps would gain him entry. Henrik answered the door himself, a thin man in his 60s whose skilled hands had crafted more than just clockwork over the years. His workshop contained several projects that served Cael's intelligence needs, including a network of mechanical listening devices placed throughout key locations. "Commander," Henrik greeted him quietly, using the title only in complete privacy. "I was hoping you'd come tonight." "What have you heard?" Henrik led him into the workshop where several small clockwork devices sat in various stages of assembly. The device in the hub's administrative section picked up something interesting this afternoon. He activated one of the mechanisms, its delicate gears engaging to produce a scratchy but recognizable reproduction of recorded conversation. Reports from the outlying facilities are concerning. The integration remains unstable across all test subjects. That's why we're accelerating the timeline. The research must be relocated before... The recording cut off. The device's limited storage capacity reached. That was Lady Valerian's voice, Henrik explained, speaking with someone whose voice wasn't clear enough to identify. But the implications... They're moving the research, Cael concluded. The Heart and whatever else they've established here. It would seem so. The question is where and how soon. Cael considered this development carefully. If Ravina was pulling her research operations out of Concordia, it suggested either security concerns or a need for facilities better suited to their work. Either way, it represented a significant shift in the occupation's priorities. Your devices elsewhere? Anything about transportation timing? Nothing specific yet, but I've noticed increased activity around the portal hub's restricted sections. More personnel coming and going, equipment being moved. Henrik adjusted one of his listening devices, fine-tuning its sensitivity. There's also been unusual activity from the House of Night Whispers. This caught Cael's attention immediately. What kind of activity? Coded messages moving through their network, more than usual, and with higher encryption than they typically employ. Henrik's expression grew troubled. Whatever they're planning or responding to, it's significant enough to warrant their strongest security protocols. The House of Night Whispers. Maintaining Rose's secret portal network represented one of the few remaining independent powers in Concordia. If they were activating enhanced communications protocols, they either had advanced knowledge of Ravena's plans or were preparing their own response to the changing situation. Keep monitoring, Cael instructed. Any information about transportation schedules, personnel movements, or communication intercepts, the next few days, may be critical. Henrik nodded, already returning his attention to the delicate mechanisms that served as Cael's electronic ears throughout the city. Be careful, Commander. If they're investigating military-trained individuals, your background makes you a potential target. I'm always careful, Cael replied, though he appreciated the reminder. His survival over the past year had depended on maintaining perfect operational security, never allowing patterns to emerge that might draw attention. As he prepared to leave, Henrik handed him a small device no larger than a pocket watch. Personal alarm, he explained. If you're ever compromised, activate it. The signal will reach me wherever you are in the city. Cael examined the device, masterful craftsmanship disguised as an ordinary timepiece. Appreciated, but I don't intend to need it. None of us intend to need insurance, Commander, but we carry it nonetheless. The rain had begun to fall by the time Cael emerged from Henrik's workshop, a light drizzle that would help mask his movements as he made his way to his final appointment of the evening. Madame Soleil had requested another meeting, her message indicating information that required personal discussion rather than written communication. The Velvet Thorn's discreet rear entrance admitted him without question, the staff recognizing him despite the late hour. Madame Soleil received him in her private office, her elegant bearing unchanged, despite the stress lines that seemed more pronounced in the lamplight. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to the familiar chair across from her desk. "Wine? You look like you could use something stronger than tavern ale." "Please." Cael accepted the offered glass, noting its quality. Madame Soleil served nothing but the finest to her select clients and trusted contacts. "Elise has been avenged," she said simply, raising her glass in a brief toast. "Major Keller paid for his crimes. My girls sleep more peacefully knowing that justice found him." "Justice finds its way," Cael replied, the same neutral phrase he'd used before. "Indeed it does." She sipped her wine thoughtfully. "But Keller's death has created complications. The investigation has expanded beyond what we anticipated." "I'm aware. They're looking for military-trained individuals. More than that, they're systematically reviewing anyone with tactical knowledge, combat experience, or connections to the old Concordian forces." Her expression grew grave. 3 former soldiers have been arrested for questioning in the past week. Men whose only crime was serving their city before the occupation. This was worse than Cael had realized. The investigation wasn't just seeking Keller's killer. It was becoming a purge of potential resistance leadership. "Any released?" he asked. "One. Broken, terrified, speaking of interrogation methods that..." She paused, composing herself. "Methods that would make demons blanch. The other 2 haven't been seen since their arrests." Cael absorbed this information grimly. His action against Keller, justified though it was, had triggered consequences beyond the immediate tactical situation. Now innocent men were suffering for his decisions. "There's more," Madame Soleil continued. "Lady Valerian has been asking questions about information networks in the city, specifically about how intelligence moves between different establishments. She suspects organized cooperation. She knows there's organized cooperation. The question is how much she understands about its structure. Madame Soleil leaned forward slightly. My sources suggest she's particularly interested in the connection between the pleasure houses, the taverns, and certain retired individuals. The trap was closing, not quickly, but with methodical precision. Valerian was mapping the social networks that enabled resistance, identifying the informal channels through which information flowed. Eventually, those channels would lead back to their sources, including Cael himself. Recommendations? He asked. Dispersion? Fragmentation? Make the network harder to trace by reducing direct connections. She finished her wine, setting the glass down with deliberate care. Some of us should consider alternative arrangements. You're leaving Concordia. I'm considering it. The House of Night Whispers has offered safe passage through their private routes, for myself and any of my girls who wish to relocate. Her expression softened slightly. The offer extends to trusted friends. Cael shook his head. My work isn't finished here. I thought you'd say that. She stood, moving to a cabinet from which she withdrew a sealed envelope. If you change your mind, or if circumstances force the decision, this contains everything you need to contact the Night Whispers network. Cael accepted the envelope, tucking it into an inner pocket. What about Lady Vess's household? They're trapped, too visible to run, too valuable to abandon. But she smiled slightly. Trapped birds sometimes sing the most beautiful songs when they know someone is listening. And if Valerian discovers the connection, then we'll discover just how much Lady Vess truly values the loyalty of her staff. Madame Soleil returned to her chair, but that's a bridge to cross when we reach it. For now, the information keeps flowing. Thunder rumbled overhead as their meeting concluded, the storm's intensity matching the growing pressure Cael felt from all directions. The investigation into Keller's death, Ravena's research operations preparing to relocate, increased security throughout the city, all combining to make his intelligence work more dangerous with each passing day. As he made his way back to his quarters through the rain-soaked streets, Cael reflected on the choices ahead. Madame Soleil's offer of safe passage was tempting. The House of Night Whispers' secret portals could take him beyond Draven's reach, allow him to continue the fight from safer ground. But Concordia still needed watchers, still needed someone to document what was happening, to preserve the intelligence that future resistance might require. And if Ravena's research was indeed relocating, understanding where and why could prove crucial to stopping whatever she was ultimately planning. Back in his modest room, Cael updated his coded journals with the evening's discoveries. Lady Valerian's return, the acceleration of research timelines, the systematic investigation of former military personnel, all pieces of a larger pattern that was becoming clearer with each entry. As dawn approached, he prepared for what might be his most dangerous intelligence operation yet. Lady Vess's staff had reported a special meeting at dawn, with the East Wing closed to all normal personnel. If Valerian was planning the research relocation, details of that plan might emerge from whatever discussion was taking place. Getting close enough to observe without being detected would require all his accumulated knowledge of the House of Silver Mirror's layout and security procedures. A single mistake could expose not just himself, but his entire network. But the intelligence was too valuable to ignore. Whatever was discussed in that meeting could determine the fate of Ravena's research, and potentially the future of multiple realms. Commander Cael Varnor checked his weapons one final time, ensured his escape routes were clear, and prepared to step deeper into the shadows than ever before. The game was accelerating, and the stakes had never been higher.